So first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I'm so thrilled to have the chance to present my research. So I'm a first year PhD student, so I'm really at the beginning of my research. As introduced, my main research looks at French missionaries' natural history activities in China. Um, but today I am more focusing on one of my side projects, and I'm looking at a different group of actors, the French consul in China, and that's where I'd like to begin. So in 1860, Parisians witnessed the opening of a new zoological garden, the Jardin zoologique d'acclimatation, located at the northern end of the Bois de Boulogne. It was a new venue for Sunday outings for bourgeois families. In the year the garden opened, visitors could already see notable species from China, which supplied the golden pheasant, the ring-necked pheasant, the silver pheasant, the yak, as well as the oak silkworm, among others. Over the next 15 years, many more kinds of animals from China were added to the exhibits, including many fish, like the paradise fish, to its aquarium. So, how did these exotic animals arrive at the garden? Who sent them? And for what purposes? Last summer, when I visited the Jardin d'Acclimatation, which is now an amusement park and still has a hint of exoticism, I became curious about its transnational history with China. I soon discovered records in the Bulletin de la Société d'Acclimatation, the periodical of the society overseeing the garden. And the name of an active member, Philibert Dabry de Thiersant, consul in Hankou, frequently appeared. Obviously, materials like these well incorporated a 19th century French gaze and almost an official kind of gaze on Chinese nature. But what more precisely was it like? So previous scholarship on zoos and natural history collections, such as those of Harriet Ritwell, Michael Osborne, and Fatih Fan, has frequently interpreted such movements through the lens of imperialism. So seeing exotic animals as symbols of domination and control seems to be a consensus. The opinion that Western Europeans viewed Chinese knowledge as inferior can also be traced in large part to Michael Ada's Machines as Measure of Men. So in this work, Adas draws extensively from British John Barrow's Travels in China, written in 1804, to support his argument that Europeans in the 19th century systematically constructed a discourse of Chinese stagnation and backwardness. While this characterization may hold some truth in the British imperial context, Adas did not engage substantially with French or other European primary sources. Um, Here, contrary to what Adas has argued, I argue that they are insufficient for understanding the French engagement with animals from China. Instead, I suggest that French actors did not primarily perceive China's nature as backward or in need of improvement, but rather as a competitive and civilized, quote unquote, um, or even a superior model of agroeconomic management. I think this view will not only bring Chinese local knowledge and its translation process into view, but will also alter our perspective of the production of colonial era scientific knowledge. So it is well established that the activities of the Société impériale zoologique d'acclimatation, which was established in 1854 during the Second Empire of France, were a nexus of natural history and French colonialism of the period. The society had an intimate relationship with the Ministry of Agriculture and Commerce, which treated acclimatization as a technical pathway for agricultural improvement and colonial development. On the left-hand side is the first president of the society, Isidore Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire, a prominent scientist. And at the center, it is Edouard Drouin de Lhuys, who was the minister of foreign relations of France at the time, and who became the second president of the society in 1862. So in practice, the society functioned as a semi-official experimental platform and also a network of experts. Under Napoleon III's firm backing, the society uh, had the Minister of Foreign Affairs as its president in 1862, and also mobilized its global diplomatic networks to gather organisms that could further France's economic interests. So it was in the same year of 1862 that Philibert Dabry de Thiersant, the figure I'm showing on the right-hand side, took up the post of consul in Hankou. So Hankou is the city that I'm encircling in white on the right-hand side image along the Yangtze River. After becoming consul, he soon negotiated French concession in this inland port city, which was a right granted to the French government in the Treaty of Tianjin following China's defeat in its war with the Anglo-French army. For the newly appointed consul, economic concerns were paramount. At the time, France had relatively limited trade with China. The British the British did export considerable quantities of opium, but the French found little demand for their manufactured goods, such as clocks or wine, in the Chinese market. Improving domestic production to increase commercial competitiveness thus remained an urgent endeavor. Against this background, Dabui began to pay close attention to the resources of the Middle Kingdom and gradually developed a particular interest in Chinese fish species and fishing practices. In 1863, he sent the first batch of animals to the society, comprising specimens from 23 species of Yangtze fish that he preserved in alcohol, and along with a quantity of fish eggs provided by local fishermen. According to Dabui, the province of Hubei, where Hankou was one of the most fertile in the empire. One of those whose climate conditions most closely resemble those of Europe. It was only perhaps natural that Dabui had this perception because um, Hubei, the province of Hubei, did occupy a central position uh, within the Qing Empire in terms of its fishery. If we have to compare the ecological conditions of freshwater fisheries in China and France, we may establish that there are over 140 species in the middle reaches of the Yangtze. And by contrast, for France's Rhone River, on whose banks Daphne was born, nevertheless, we have the presence of only about 45 fish species. On the scientific front, what Daphne had in mind was an emerging 19th century vision in France that was pisciculture, pisciculture. It meant that breeding and rearing of fish must be done in a controlled way. For a long time, depopulation of waterways had been a recurrent theme among French scientists. Although these claims were usually not firmly grounded, the concern over aquatic degradation catalyzed a state-sponsored scientific field of pisciculture. Research in pisciculture at the time was hailed as having the potential to offer infinite stocking of rivers and compensate for overfishing. Such a notion also involved attempts at selectively repopulating French rivers with adaptive and resilient foreign fish. When it comes to the collection of fish, a key figure assisting Dabui was his Chinese translator, Li Hongfang, a young Christian who acted as an intermediary, reporting information to Dabui from local practitioners and knowledge holders. According to the diary of missionary Armand David, who encountered this young man in 1868, Li was the one who had especially assisted Mr. Dabui in his acquisitions by going up the Yangtze as far as Sichuan, another province, to purchase fish there. Later that year, Dabui actually brought Li Hongfang to France via Shanghai in his service. What followed, however, developed into a violent conflict between the two. During the voyage, Li Hongfang was responsible for caring for the living animals and plants. Uh, and upon arriving in Paris, Li Hongfang also served as both Dabui's Chinese secretary and household servant. He also worked as a Chinese translator for the Société d'acclimatation. On January 18th of the year 1869, that he became enraged because a bird he had entrusted to Li Hongfang's care had frozen to death. In front of his friends, he beat Li Hongfang more than 30 times. He then sent Li to the police station and had him detained for 3 days on charges of poisoning birds, crushing dogs, and defaming his wife. Through the intervention of sinologists David de Saint-Denis and Father Benny, Li Hongfang was later finally released. In 1868 as well, Davy sent a large collection of fish specimens from the Yangtze River to the Société d'acclimatation, along with crustacean specimens. The fish collection included a new species of sturgeon, later named Davy sturgeon, in his honor, which is today an endangered species, uh, along with a Chinese paddlefish and numerous cyprinids and some other species. Having returned from China to Paris, he personally attended the Society's meeting of June 12th, during which the Society's president, Juan de Luis, highly acclaimed his contributions. Li Hongfang's name, however, never appeared anywhere in the Society's reports. So, drawing on his own observations and information gathered with Li's help, he published La pisciculture et la pêche en Chine, Pisciculture and Fishing in China in 1872. In this work, he argues that Chinese practices displayed a high degree of systematic organization and efficiency, from which France had much to learn. He writes, "It is they who also invented pisciculture, meaning the Chinese, or the artificial rearing of domesticated fish. To illustrate this, he maintains that all farms in China had fish ponds with systematic breeding in which the aquatic plants were distributed daily to domestic fish at the same time as grain to the poultry of the farmyard." He sums up also by exclaiming, "What a difference from what happens in our countries," meaning France, where river fish, having become a luxury item, will end up passing into the realm of legendary myths. It's the quote I am showing here. He also argues that the Chinese had fishing tools that the French could adopt. Indeed, some of the tools were similar or even identical in both cultures. He notes that the Baishango was exactly the stationary or trailing bottom line that French fishermen use in various parts of France. Nevertheless, the Chinese had unique inventions, unique technologies, like Diaobaichuan. These are whiteboard boats that kind of exploit optical mirage effects when fishing, um, and among others. That he also pays close attention to the seasonal fishing calendar, which was calibrated according to lunar months and solar terms. And all these, according to Dabry, demonstrates that Chinese fishermen were very skilled at predicting weather changes. And on the whole, the Chinese just have brought the art of fishing to a very high degree of perfection. So these are his original words. Eventually, the outcome of Dabry and the Society's efforts to improve France's economy via exotic species was a combination of success and mostly failure. A prominent example is the paradise fish, a fairly popular fish among hobbyists in Europe until today. While indoor acclimatization was a success, outdoor overwintering experiments ultimately failed due to severe cold. So as a result, similar experiments often enriched the variety of ornamental fish in Europe and helped taxonomic research, but their utility for fishery or alimentary purposes, as supposed, was rather limited. In terms of the Chinese birds, due to time constraints, I will only discuss this briefly. A key figure here was missionary Joseph-Marie Chauveau, apostolic vicar of Tibet, who was based in the Sino-Tibetan border town of Dajianlu, Sichuan. At Dabry's request, he first identified his location in 1867 as a site where various birds could be obtained. He subsequently organized the procurement of different pheasants to be sent to either Britain or France via Hankou. In a borderland region like Dajianlu, the Qing Empire's control remained much stronger than the French or the British. And the missionaries and consuls relied much on local hunters, porters, and merchants who formed pre-existing trade networks. Such networks often sustained a Chinese kind of imperial faunal economy that reinforced the empire's dominance over its frontier. So in such cases, to argue for an expansion of, to argue that these birds embodied an expansion of Western informal empire, as some of the former scholars did, I think would be a little bit of stretch. So why did the French elites persistently approach China as a polity possessing sophisticated system of agricultural management? Effectively, Dabry was not the only one to think China possessed agricultural secrets. This cultural interpretation was mostly obviously um, rooted in the physiocratic tradition beginning with François Quesnay, but later rendered more nuanced by 19th century sinologists. It is well established that the arguments advanced by Quesnay in Le despotisme de la Chine, despotism of China in the 18th century, were shaped by French Jesuit accounts of China, which helped establish an image of Chinese governance as fundamentally agrarian, one in which the emperor was portrayed as personally exemplifying agricultural labor, which was virtuous and harmonious. So from the mid-19th century onward, as France renewed contact with China, this intellectual tradition had become more specialized and more empirically grounded. Sinologists such as Stanislas Julien and Léon d'Hervé de Saint-Denis translated Chinese agricultural treatises into French. Both scholars were, of course, closely connected to and were actively participating in the activities of the Société d'acclimatation. These works, so as I'm showing here, one on sericulture and the other on Chinese agricultural techniques more broadly, presented Chinese practices as the crystallization of centuries of careful environmental management. And in particular, they emphasized the potential of implementing Chinese techniques and organisms in France, as well as in Algeria. So to sum up, instead of imperialism, I propose that it is possible to understand this transmission of Chinese faunal knowledge and culture to France through conceptual frameworks such as we could consider frameworks such as industrial espionage, or the more politically neutral concept of intelligent travel. I draw this idea from historian Paola Bertucci, who proposes in her study of the Northern European construction of Italy as a land of marvels. So as I have argued, the construction of China as an agriculturally and thus naturally superior territory governed by legal despotism in accordance with natural law had a similar lineage as people's imagination of Italy. In acclimatization discourse, since biodiversity was often equated with advancement in agroeconomic management, China's partial backwardness in industrial development did not overshadow what was perceived as its decidedly more abundant natural world. In fact, China and its plants and animals illuminate a point of divergence within the Western powers in how civilizational progress, again, quote unquote, was evaluated. While both the British and the French elites embraced teleological ideologies and imagined a linear path from barbarism to civilization, the French generally held more favorable views of political centralization and social secularism, and they placed far less emphasis on industrialization. In administrative and statistical discourse, agriculture and land management were repeatedly regarded as positive signs of civilization. They symbolized the morality of the state, a kind of lasting social order, productive equilibrium, and also a rational kind of governance. So this is my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention and listening.